Hi, I'm Ali Words, and this is Last Unrifled Yaw. Last Unrifled Yaw is a podcast where we have conversations about video art, experimental music, avant garde literature, performance art, and the occult. If you or someone you know would like to be on Last Unrifled Yaw, please get in touch. This episode of Last Unrifled Yaw is a conversation with artist Dan, whose YouTube channel is called The Arp Effect. Dan has made over 100 of these little videos where he kind of just plays around and experiments with a wide range of tools that he has for making music, and then he packages them up with little experimental videos. Find out more in the episode to come. Hey everyone, this is Ali Words and Dan.
How you doing?
Hey. So Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, my name's Dan. I'm in Manchester, in England. I guess I'm just a musician, really, and I'm making videos on the side and enjoying that process. So I think we want to talk about how I went about making those videos.
Yeah, just your process in general, both for music and video.
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
So I think the latest thing that I've been working on is kind of, I think, very pandemic influenced in the way that it sort of happened, because I was kind of I'm in my mid 40s now, and I went to art school, when I was younger, and then I've kind of drifted away from it. But I've always been making music, and then when we were in that first lockdown, it really encouraged me to kind of get out all the old kind of guitar pedals and stuff like that together. So that was very much kind of like messing around with all them on the floor, trying to find that kind of ambient kind of tone that I was looking for, but just really enjoying playing with these kind of toys again. And that was really brought back that kind of artistic side of me that I really wanted to kind of try and capture. So I started recording all those kind of little bits of sound. And then a lot of it was just kind of exploration of stuff without really, I wouldn't even say it was improvisation. It's just noodling and messing around. And I think there's something really nice about when you get something that's not necessarily a conscious piece that you've made, and then you start to cut it down. It adds a significance to it that's not there before as a sprawling piece. You start to make decisions, and that's kind of like, primarily what art is, isn't it? About making decisions about things and then showing them to people. And so just making those recordings, and then we tried to find a similar process to make video. I mean, I've always made videos and films and stuff like that on the side. Got a bunch of friends that we make films with and that kind of stuff. And I wanted to kind of find a visual style. So they're very much layered video, but really trying not to do anything to it. Just put the video on top of each other. There's conscious tricks, as I think, you'll know yourself, Ali, in terms of like the video, how you layer those videos on. But if you just take some video and put it on top of each other, sometimes some little bits of magic comes, and it's those little glimpses of stuff where the little patterns form. They feel like little special bits. You might get 3 minutes of smeary garbage on the screen, but there's an occasion where something really magical happens, and it's really worth doing. And I think that's a lot of the kind of thing that I was trying to find in those videos. So I made 10 of them, like kind of really kind of random sounds, guitar sounds, a lot of effects and feedback and that kind of stuff, and then layered the videos on. Sometimes we're making the videos and not even reviewing them before we export them and putting them on there. And again, it's that process of the snippet of the sound and the randomness of the video and that edit, and then putting it onto something like YouTube, for example. It's that there's a significance there that I think that gives it some weight just by doing, and it's that creative process of just doing something, of just forming a piece that just kept me going. So I made 10 and then I made 100. And that was, yeah. So it was just kind of got into a hobby of doing it, for a little while. You just jam some sounds, take those little snippets, and then again, work with those sounds, and you get to figure out what's going to look good over the top of each other, little bits of videos. I think I got obsessed with people, with GoPros in caves, those kind of videos, they look great when you start to mess with them. And I think there's some boxes that look beautiful, and it's just kind of like those little patterns that you get. Do you know what I mean? When you just kind of look at something and it doesn't look like anything particularly interesting, and then suddenly it just
Yeah,
changes,
I love that.
and there's a little thing in
Now I
that,
have to
and
ask,
then it disappears again. Yeah,
um,
go for it.
what do you think makes GoPro videos of caves particularly beautiful in the way you're using them?
It's is there's a contrast to them. So what you've got technically is a black image around the edge, and then they're usually in a high spotlight. So you've got like a very specific kind of visual bit in there. So a black edge and a white circle in the middle where you've got that head, and that gives you that something to play with. I think when you have like images that are very flat, they tend to not to work in that kind of thing. I think it's good when you get things like factories are really great as well, because you get lots of repetitive lines and streaks, and there's a grid formation over there. So when you start to lay that, you start to get little patterns that form in. I think I had quite a lot of plants, close-ups of plants growing. That's really good, where you've got those organic shapes that are emerging, and once you start to layer them, you add things like saturation and contrast, or you just make them all black and white. And then you use that image as a mask for something else. You start building up, and I think there's a lot of analogies there with abstract painting as well, because there's that concept of when you're making an abstract painting, is when you finished, when is it? And I remember a project that I did when I was at university, and it was I did an abstract painting on the same canvas every day. So I come in, play around with paint, push paint around for a while, get something at the end of the day that I thought was great, take a picture of it, and then whitewash it out. And then the next day come back in and do another one. So at the end of the month, I think it was actually 2 months, I think we did it on. It was this huge, bubbly, horrible like thing, but it gone through, we had all these pictures, 30 or 31 pictures of the stages of this, and every painting, it was almost like people were like, that looks brilliant, you should just leave that. And then out comes the big white brush and you push it out again. And I think that there's that destruction factor was really quite interesting. And I think that you get a lot of that when you're doing that, layering those videos. It's like, is it finished? Is there another layer that you can do? Is there something else? And sometimes you just do it and it'll just, it'll knock it out and it's all black again and just gone smeary. So it's that finding that little balance of when's just enough. But you could go on forever, couldn't you? Just adding more and more layers to them. But I like the idea of not thinking about it too much.
Interesting. Yeah, I find that often my limitation is just what my computer can handle. Because there's only so much that you can render at a time.
Yeah, I mean, I was making films, those little films out, 3-minute YouTube clip, and then just repeating and repeating. So they weren't really that process heavy. It gets a bit chunky when you've got 5 or 6 layers going on, but I try and do it in as minimal as possible, really. And I think it's just, it's a case of finding that right footage. And I think that was a real journey in itself, figuring out what's going to work and also changing it up. So I think I went through a space phase. It was like, let's find, videos of planets and spaceships and that kind of stuff. And you do 3 or 4 videos of that and then moving on. And I was also trying to not use any fancy manipulation. So everything is very, I've got Final Cut and everything's installed. I have got some fancier plugins and stuff from when making films, but it's like, I really wanted to use the stock stuff. No decent gear on this, just kind of keep it as simple as possible and really constrain to those kind of blend modes with a few mirror effects and that kind of thing. I mean, there's probably loads of effects in there when you get back into it. I think I just start dropping on, but again, it's kind of, quite like that mirror effect. Just drag that randomly onto a clip. Try not even to watch it through, and then keep adding stuff, and then export and upload before you've even had a chance to review. It's like committing.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting analog to music. I guess maybe more so sound design, is that
Sure.
If you limit yourself to only analog sources of sound or ways to modify your sound, there are a lot of little details that arise that if you were to do the same thing digitally, those details just
Mm.
wouldn't exist. Like really small resonances, or the way wood or metal vibrates, or just like the acoustics of the room. Like real reverb always has more going on to it if your microphone can capture it than whatever
Yeah.
reverb effect you have in your software.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, room is such an important sound. Wherever you are, the way that the sound interacts with it, and that just gives that's you're right there. It gives it that spirit of that sound that's not there if it's just a purely digital thing. But there's stuff that you can do with digital as well. That's got its own quality in there as well. If you start to crunch it down, it's there is some nice stuff there. But again, I think it's polarizing. That conversation is fruitless because I think the joy is in between the two. Bouncing one into the other.
Yeah. What kind of effects do you hope that either your music and or your videos have on viewers?
I don't really think about viewers. I'm not doing it for those reasons. It's more of a cathartic experience for myself, really. It's in its own little selfish way. Um, it's not. I don't. I'm. It's not that I'm not interested in what people think about it. It's just, and it sounds dismissive to say I don't care. Because that's probably not true, but it's not something that influences me really, or something that I really spend a lot of time thinking about.
Yeah, I gotcha. For a lot of my own music, um, I definitely am not making it for other people, but I do
Yeah,
normally try to make it so it produces some sort of effect in myself. What kind of
sure.
what kind of effect are you trying to produce? What kind of catharsis, if you don't mind talking about that?
Again, it's more that the catharsis is experiment and play. It's not about. I've been in that position, music making, where you're trying to make the best thing that you can do, and you're trying to get that, to capture the perfect thing at the minute. So I got, from all, I bought all those guitar pedals, and then a year later I sold them all, and now I'm into modular synths, and I've got some, Chet Lombard stuff as well. And it's like there's constantly a new. I've just bought this week. I've just bought an oud. I bought a Lucy 6 months ago. So I'm always like looking for like what's the next like little thing, and can I capture that and record that and put that through that, and what's the next little synth, and buy this and then sell the previous stuff. So it's all about, that's a journey really. And I think a lot of the music that I'm making now is just merely figuring that out. I mean, it's almost like the analogy might be I'm just recording myself learning to play guitar. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing, but with the synth and the modular and that kind of stuff, it's all, there's loads of interesting stuff that you can do. And again, it's that same kind of thing of, you might have something that's not particularly interesting, but you change just one element, and there's a ripple effect, and all of a sudden you've got a groove, or you've got something that really sounds interesting, and then you might do something else and you lose it again. And it's the similar things we were talking about in terms of the abstract painting and the videos, is that those moments appear and then they disappear, and they're ephemeral. It's not a permanence. You could go back and you could record it, and you could record those bits and make a great tune out of all those bits, but there's something in the fact that it's a thing that shifts constantly. It's not always great. It's not always really worth many listens, but something in that capturing, in that hope that you're going to get those moments.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of experimental music is that way, where both for the person or people making it and whoever is experiencing it later on, a lot of it is more
Yeah,
about experiencing whatever it was that the people were experimenting with, rather than
yeah,
specific like consumable good.
absolutely. Yeah, and it's that thing of like, I'm just recording this. This is me at this time, and I'm just making some recordings of that. And there's no fanfare. There's not necessarily. I'm not putting it, the artistic element of it is the process and the ongoing process, not necessarily the individual piece of work in itself.
So do you?
Does that make
Yeah, it makes
sense?
total sense.
Yeah,
I used to record myself improvising on piano that way, but I treat it more like somewhere between like a scrapbook and a journal. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think that, I mean, when I was at uni, I made loads of paintings, but I think my favorite things were my scrapbooks. those, you get those big books and they're just full of stuff and you can hardly close them. There's so many great bits in there, and again, some of it's crap, some of it's brilliant, and it's like those little moments. That's all it's about. And I think I look back at time at art school with those journals more fondly than I do with any of the work that I made.
Hmm.
There's an informality to them that's just nicer, I think.
Yeah. I'm just thinking back to, I have some old sketchbooks. I used to do lots of automatic drawings.
Yeah.
Where like for anyone listening, you would like scrawl um sort of randomly, like you'd hold a pencil in your hand and you would try to unconsciously let whatever is coming through come through.
Yeah.
Um and they're
Yeah.
heavily influenced by your state of mind, your mood, where you're located. Um so having like a book of like 200 of these done on different days, it really shows you the evolution of the way your body would move and interpret just whatever's going on in your life.
I think so. And I think you can see yourself in there as well. You can see what your is, because you try and, like you say, you're trying to switch off from all these things. But right down there is the core review of whatever it is, and whether it's a heavy stroke or a light stroke or a straight stroke or a swirly stroke. There's an essence of you in there that you're not necessarily conscious of.
Do you have any inspiration sources?
Well, loads of music, obviously loads of stuff there, lots of world music, lots of like house and techno and that kind of stuff. But I think abstract expressionists were my thing when I was at uni. That was what I was really into. And there we had a lot of fun mimicking them. Making Rothko paintings. I mean, that's great. You're an art student, let's have a go at. Of course, you're going to have a go at making a Rothko, aren't you? Why not? Just throw a bit of paint around. It's great, and it's just like you kind of get into that. You see the paint, those pictures of the abstract expressionists. The big guys with the massive mustaches, and they're like proper, really serious about what they're doing, and it's just like 12-foot blue canvas with a white stripe on it, and it's in it, but it's got all this kind of like a lot of this kind of religious backstory, and there's those kind of hero arts. We were kind of like, we mocked them, but we loved them when I was, me and my friends at art school. We just kind of wanted that kind of hero art, that pedestal, and I think it's about, there's something in that kind of, again, just going back to that, you title something and you put it on that pedestal and you call it a piece of art, and it just changes the context of it. And that's always been fascinating. That's the Duchamp or Warhol or all that kind of stuff. They've always got that kind of aspect to the work, and I think I like that with the music making. You kind of think, I've done stuff where I've listened to it and I go, I don't particularly think that's that good, but it's captured, so you committed, so give it a title, put it on pretend album, put it on Bandcamp, and it's parked there forever. And then come back to it 6 months later, and you kind of think, oh, there's something in there that I couldn't hear before. And I think it has that effect of, it's packaged as a piece of art. And I think there's a nice difference there between that packaging and that kind of scrapbook effect.
Yeah, I often find with, especially some of my music that I don't release, that I go back and forth between either thinking I did something really good and just like, this is awful. Why did I do this?
Yeah.
I don't know. Something about, I guess, your tastes and your understanding and the way you hear it changes with time.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, and I think I don't know what kind of music you're making, but I mean, I'm making kind of ambient stuff as well. So and I always think with that kind of stuff, it's really difficult to kind of decide if it's any good or not, because a lot of it is that moment that you're playing something and things just drop and it's great, and then it's, if you listen to it back cold, just 7 minutes of static and sounds like someone detuning a radio. But it's like in the right mood, it can capture that kind of thing. And I think it's those moments that I heard a song on the radio. Me and my wife went on a spa break, and we were in this hotel, and I put the radio on. It was Six Music, which is like a alternative music channel in the UK. And there was a track on there, and it just absolutely blew me away. And then I wrote it down, and then I came back home and listened to it, and it just didn't didn't have the same kind of thing. I think it was, again, it was a captured moment.
Yeah. I think ambient music in particular is really influenced by where you are when you listen to it.
Sure, definitely, yeah.
It seemed.
So what kind of
Oh yeah,
music?
I was
Go on,
just going
sorry.
to ask what you were going to ask, and then I interrupted you while you were asking again.
No, go on. You go ahead.
So what were you about to ask?
All right. No, I was just going to ask what kind of music you making.
All sorts. Um,
Yeah.
so the last thing that I released was a 12 tone. It might be a canon. It uses some like elements from the way fugues are composed, but I'm sure it's not like formally one of the specific species of fugues from Bach's Art of the Fugue
Sure.
or whatever. Um, but it's a 12 tone canon that is uh, a video ritual intended
Okay.
to help the person performing it and people that enter a trance state while watching and listening to it tune into the kind of consciousness associated with a book that I published back in, I think, maybe January, called Geist
Mm-hmm.
Rising. And it was really different for me because what I did is I recorded myself playing each of the 12 tones individually, both like short and long tones, like 3 or 4 of each, um, on a bunch of different instruments. I didn't do trombone. I have a plastic trombone because like I don't think I would have gotten accurate enough. But I'd have like a violin, piano, uh, something like a lap steel guitar, uh,
Yeah.
flutes. I guess they were recorders actually, not flutes. I have a pan flute, but it's not tuned properly. A bunch of different things, right? And then I arranged
Yeah.
all the notes individually because it was more complicated than I could personally play. Oh, also a little lap harp. Um,
All right. Cool.
and then I did actually practice singing um, an atonal fugue, which was a. It's interesting. It's difficult to. You can compose the melodies, so the intervals that your voice jumps between aren't that hard to sing, but it's pretty
Yeah.
easy to lose track of your tonal center. So like I didn't sing all the way through. I sang like, here's this phrase, this tone row. I'm going to sing it like 20 times. Take the best take.
Yeah.
Um, but then I also have some like 20 to 30 minute like ambient noise intensity pieces is what I call them. Those are on my bandcamp
Oh
that are
yeah.
intended for ecstatic dance. Like they slowly build up to um, just really intense, not industrial noise because they mostly use analog things. I used to just sometimes wander out into the world and record things like dumpsters or anything broken that I found, branches.
Yeah.
So I had
Sure.
like a huge folder full of all these random sounds from things I found. Um, the track I had in mind when we were talking about things that we sometimes like and don't like going back and listening to is up on, I think it's on my itch page, but also my Bandcamp. It's called Vagaries for an Unknown Mood. And it's really a lot like the way you described making music. It was very exploratory. What I did is I got a theremin, a Moog Etherwave,
Yeah.
and a loop pedal, and a couple other cheap guitar pedals, just like reverb and amp, not amp. What was it? Uh, Distortion, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, and I improvised these microtonal gesture clouds, is how I think of them. Some of them I specifically played slowly enough to where I could have the notes line up, but other pieces, and each piece is like maybe 30 to 60 seconds, with maybe 20 to 30 layers of me improvising on theremin over it. Some of them are more just like, here are 20 to 30 out of tune electric violin sounding um, voices ascending all out of sync, both tonally and metrically with each other, until they reach a climax where they're all at the top and then it all plummets down. That kind of stuff. And then some of the tracks I like chopped up into little bits and composed with them. But yeah, it's like a 15-minute track made out of a bunch of these, maybe like 15 or 20 of these little sound bites that were made all on different days over the course of a year using a theremin and loop pedal.
Wow. See, that sounds like a really considered piece of work. Whereas I'm just, good little ambient boy messing around and just capturing, just pressing record, straight to stereo, straight, one track mixed down, no overdubs, no nothing. Whereas, that's the other end of the spectrum, isn't it? Where it's just everything is really thought out and meticulously considered.
Somewhat. Yeah, I tend to like plan out my workflow and then I improvise within the workflow.
Sure. Yeah. But that sounds like you a real construction piece there of taking those individual tones and then building and building. How did you know you were doing it right?
Well, I used to play piano a fair amount.
Sure.
I tended to play modernist music, but I also learned to play. I was able to play the first fugue from Bach's Art of the Fugue with the sheet music in front of me. I didn't memorize everything in that one. Or a lot of Maurice Ravel. I did a fair amount of 12-tone composing back in the day, and it had been the first atonal piece that I had written in probably like 5 or 6 years, if you're talking about that one.
Yeah. But how much of it was? See, I think this is it. How much of the thing was in your head that you was, and then got out of your head, or how much of it was kind of? Did you let it lead you? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What the difference between the two? Yeah.
So composing fugues or things like that is very formalistic.
Sure.
So ahead of time, I knew how I was going to record everything, and I knew the sort of mood that was going to happen. In order to make that mood, I wrote out all 12 tones, like each of the letters, and then I figured out what intervals I could use to make like a 12 quarter note long. I actually compose in what I call fundamental units. I don't write in quarter notes or eighth notes, so that I can infinitely divide them as necessary. But I figured out how to write just like a 12 note melody that has all 12 notes, such that if you double it, meaning you make it twice as fast, and you play it over top of itself, it doesn't produce any intervals that are too discordant. So it won't sound too bad if you play it over itself double speed. Then what I did is, to make the second 12-tone row, is I made sure that if you played the second 12-tone row over itself double speed, it would also sound okay. And if you played the first tone row and the second tone row together at the same speed, that would also sound okay. That way I knew that I could play around with them a fair amount, and I'd have a lot of options for how I could play them off of each other.
Yeah, you're just locking down the tuning, aren't you? So everything, you've got that flexibility to move things around if you need.
Yeah, and then it really was pretty experimental once I did like that little mathematical part. Like I put together all the melodies in MIDI, and then once I had that, I was able to ascend all of the separately recorded notes.
Yeah, again, it's that building that structure, which is a solid foundation that you can then not necessarily ad lib upon, but it kind of gives you that kind of freedom to experiment, doesn't it?
Yeah, and honestly, it sounds like you do the same thing, or everyone does the same thing, is you have a certain set of constraints. Like when you were talking about your video editing, as you said, these are the different things I'm going to use. I'm not going to do anything that's too crazy with the plugins. And then once you have your constraints, you play around within them.
Yeah, and it's pushing those boundaries, isn't it? Because you can't push the boundaries if there aren't any boundaries. Like it's like the kind of using something like Logic for recording. I use that. There's endless tracks. You can go on and on and on and on. And again, it's that thing about knowing when to stop. You've got to put your limits on what you're doing, so that you can then kind of play within that area. And once you know those limits, that's when things start to really be exciting, I think.
Yeah, and for me, it's really interesting when each piece has its own unique constraints. Um,
Sure.
some of the, I don't know, there may be like 10 different videos I have up on YouTube where my main constraint was that I would only compose using AI generated music. There's some software you can
Yeah.
run called
Yeah.
OpenAI Jukebox. Do you already know about that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I heard
Yeah.
about it.
So
Yeah.
what I did is I ran it with different combinations of genres, and what it does is it'll spit out like 10 1 minute tracks that it thinks are in the genres you told it. And then I would
Yeah.
pick the best little pieces of those and then arrange them. And you get some really strange stuff that way because you get access to a lot of music that you wouldn't be able to get. You wouldn't be able to legally
Yeah. Sure.
release. You get like all sorts of
Yeah.
weird
Yeah.
genres and singer songwriters and bits of orchestras that turn into jazz bands partway through because the AI doesn't really understand context.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, how could it? How could it understand like the nuance of music? It's a really, pick up the BPM, but how can it detect what's the soul of a piece of music?
It
But
gets chord
that's
progressions.
definitely
It does,
really
yeah.
wow.
Like if you tell it, especially a genre that has a very narrow chord progression, like if you tell it blues, it will stick
Yeah.
to 12 bar blues plus or minus a couple bars.
Yeah.
Uh,
But I bet could it find you a sad song?
if I typed in a sad genre, yeah, like if I type in like gothic blues or whatever, you're going to get something sad. Um,
Yeah, sure.
it definitely,
But I mean,
it won't know that it's
you
sad.
couldn't. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's that kind of again. It's that nuance. It be able to you can measure the difference in tone and pitch, but can it detect that soul?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. How do I know that you can detect that soul?
Well, yeah. I mean, how do we know that it's even there? I mean, it's obviously it's a personal thing, isn't it? That you find it.
Yeah, it's we're gonna get into some really strange times with AI art and music because we're gonna get things that people find incredibly moving made by something that presumably cannot be moved.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. And I think there's something interesting there that if you preface something with here's a piece of music made by a computer, it changes the way that you're listening to it. Whereas if it was just on the radio, you wouldn't necessarily, it's what's the principle about being watched? The scientific principle. Is it not Murphy's Law?
You mean the
Um,
quantum mechanics thing?
yeah, maybe.
The
But
observer
it's just like
principle?
that.
It's something like that.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah. So that concept of just being aware of what it is that you're observing, um, you know, thinking about this as a piece of music made by a machine will completely alter how you listen to it.
What kind of difference do you think that
Do you
would make
think?
for you?
Because I think, well, for me, I'm thinking that I'm considering the process that I wouldn't necessarily do with a piece of music that I was listening for the first time. I don't think I'd go straight to the process.
So your mind would be thinking about what parts of the programming caused the music to get constructed in that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, how's it done this? How's it made this sound? And then maybe on the second listen, it would come back to the actual, the surface listen of what the actual piece is. Whereas I think it would be the other way around for a piece that I thought was made by humans.
Hmm.
I don't know. It's an interesting experiment. I might give it a go.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess that's a pretty cheap study to run. I feel like we're going to see a lot of stuff like that in
Yeah,
the next few
yeah,
years.
yeah. Definitely, yeah.
Like, what are the
Easy.
psychological effects of you just play like it's almost like the Turing test, right? You have like a bunch of tracks,
Yeah,
half of them are made by AI, half of them are made by people, all in the same genre. Sometimes you tell people that they were made by humans, sometimes by AI, and then you see how they rate them in terms of effects on like
yeah,
their different mood, or maybe you can even measure heart rate or pupil dilation or something.
definitely. Yeah. I mean, there's bound to be a bias in there, I would imagine. there's your hypothesis.
Mm. Yeah, interesting stuff. Well, do you have any questions you'd like to ask me?
What are you working on now? What's coming up for you?
I don't talk about
Because
current
you
projects. Um, I have a book I'm writing.
excellent.
Uh, I have some video and or music stuff, but that is probably going to take a while.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, I am very much enthralled with my modular setup at the minute. Do you know anything about modular or Eurorack or anything like that?
No, you could tell me about that. I know that I've heard people say that even if you leave them on the same settings, they sound different like every time.
Oh, for sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the analog oscillators, they warm up and they change. So you tune them, and then an hour later you have to go back and just refine it again. But yeah, no, it's a it's basically a big open synth that you can kind of basically build block by block, and then you just get loads of little connecting wires and and play around with it. And again, it's that thing of you can just modulate this, and it's like you got a nice sound, but then you can change the delay speed or the pitch of something, and just kind of put different oscillator sounds on there, and it's just an endless process. It never ends. Again, there's that thing about when are you going to step back and observe, and when are you working. And I really like that kind. It's a little bit Mad Professor-ish. It's kind of just a big pile of spaghetti of wires all over the place. But it's right underneath. There's like a few little knobs that you can twist. But it's a lovely thing to be kind of. It's very meditative. Just like, and it really encourages active listening. Where you set something up and then it's just like really kind of let something shift. Certainly when you start to modulate things, it's you start off with the sound, but it's very different 30 seconds later, a minute later. It's constantly changing as these various things, triangle waves, square waves, kind of interact with each other. So you get a lot of again, I think it's really similar to the videos and stuff, that it's kind of waiting for those little things to coincide. It's kind of artificially creating those moments, isn't it? I think that sounds like a theme throughout everything I'm doing at the minute, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. That's interesting. So, what do you
Yeah.
have coming up?
Just more of that, I think. I definitely want to do some more videos and stuff. I keep thinking about. I mean, this is a question for you. I mean, I find it really hard to kind of promote my stuff. I'm not, like I said, I'm not really that interested in it, but I think there is a bit of an obligation to kind of put some things on the internet, share it. So I know that you reached out because you've seen some of my stuff on posting random bits on Reddit. It's like, where are people hiding out on the internet? Because doesn't feel like it's a massive group of people that are kind of interested in the kind of stuff. Obviously it is, but where are they all? Do
I
you know?
really don't, especially for
Yeah.
video art. That was my original motivation for this. Is I don't know how to
Yeah.
find video artists. I mean, like I can find individual video artists just by like looking around on different social media platforms, but I'm not
Yeah.
aware of like any other podcasts, or at least the algorithm has not decided I'm
Exactly.
worthy
Yeah.
to see them. Um,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
figured I would just anyone that sounds like they are the kind of person I want to talk to. I got this podcast. We can
Well,
record. Yeah.
you are it then. You are the place. You are the place. Congratulations. You're starting the movement. You're bringing everybody
Yeah, I
together.
hope so. People that are making video art and other sorts of niche experimental music that maybe is not favored by the way social media favors things. It's
Totally.
hard to
Yeah.
find that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're not chasing the beat or the catchy riff, it's difficult to do it. And it's not to say that people aren't interested, because everybody, a lot of people are interested in ambient, weird, experimental music. But I think that kind of that making that thing as like, we're just kind of, well, for me personally, I'm just playing, and it's always fun to play, and share with other people, isn't it? That are kind of into the same sort of thing, that might get a kick out of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so well done, you. I will. I'll keep listening to your podcast, and hopefully find some other people to get into.
Yeah, and if you run into anyone that you think is a good match for the podcast, anyone that is making strange things, especially experimental music, video art, avant-garde literature, or things related to the occult, that
Yeah,
is the general field for this podcast.
I will bear you in mind. Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, it's been a good podcast, Dan.
Well, thank you very much, man, and genuinely, thank you for reaching out. And it's really nice to get when strangers get in touch over the internet. It's a rare phenomenon for me. So, thank you very much. It's been lovely.